You're listening to Witch Wednesdays, your weekly podcast source for all things witchcraft in the modern world. Join your hosts, Steph and Tara, every Wednesday morning as they dive into a new witchy topic. Welcome back to Witch Wednesdays. This is Steph.
And this is Tara.
And you are listening to episode 23, Sigils and Runes.
Woohoo!
So we decided to group these together because they often get confused, but they are not the same thing.
They are not. They're actually quite different, but we also don't have much to say on either topic because neither of us use them really.
That is true. So we can at least give you the background, though, of what each one is. So
yes,
we will start with runes then, and then go into why sigils are not the same thing. So runes come from the 1st century Germanic languages in Europe, and they are the characters of several different alphabets from this time period, and it's rooted in Norse culture and mythology. Yeah. So as Christianity spread throughout Europe, rune characters were gradually replaced with the Latin letters that we use in today's alphabet. But rune characters never completely disappeared, and they were revived in the 20th century along with the resurfacing of many spiritual practices like witchcraft. The complete history of the runes is not exactly known, because a lot of how they are used now relies completely on the intention of the user. So there's a lot of variation in the meanings of the various symbols. So runes are used similar to tarot. So they're a means of divination. So like tarot, each card has like a traditional, if you're using the Rider-Waite deck, each card has a traditional meaning, but beyond that, base meaning is further open to interpretation based on, the question and the user and what else they see in the cards and are feeling at that time. And runes are similar. They all have like a basic meaning, but the reader is going to infer more from them based on what the intention is, what the question is.
Yes.
So runes come in a set. Most sets come with 24 stones. And they can be stones, but they can also be like wood, like slices or chunks or plastic pieces. And they have the runes engraved on them and usually come with a blank stone. There are some, sets that have a variation of characters, but it's generally this 24 because these symbols are based on what's called the Elder Futhark alphabet. And it is the alphabet that was used from the 2nd to the 8th century CE. In the 8th century, it was replaced by the Younger Futhark that has less symbols. But when you use runes in divination, it's the Elder Futhark alphabet that's being used.
But unlike tarot, they're not all the same. Like the symbols that are most commonly used are the same, but like she said, there's sometimes 24, there's sometimes more or less thrown in there. Usually there's 24. But I did want to say they're not quite like tarot, as in you're not going to get a set that's exactly the same, whether it's wood or plastic or rock, stone.
Yes. Yeah. When you do get a set, it should include a booklet of what they mean. The other option is to make them yourself. So that is a more traditional way to add them, because then it's more attuned with your own magic. But I think it's perfectly fine to purchase them as a set, because there's some beautiful sets out there.
There are some gorgeous sets. Some of the wood ones are like hand carved, beautiful, like just gorgeous.
And they have ones that are like carved into like rose quartz stones. Like they're super pretty.
Oh yeah, there's some really gorgeous ones out there.
So I think it's perfectly fine to purchase them. It's just like the same as any other, tools that you get. If you're going to get, oracle decks or crystals or tarot cards or whatever, you want to imprint your own energy on those. And it would be the same way. But if you do want to make them, there are a lot of online resources that will give you the general alphabet to start with, and has like the interpretations of each of those like most common symbols.
And don't be afraid to buy a set as you work on yours, because if you're going to use them very extensively, it's going to take time to find the perfect stones or carve exactly how you want them. Also, don't be afraid of like nicks or scratches or little imperfections, because that makes them more yours. But at the same time, if you're like me or Steph, it's going to take you a while because you want it to as close to perfect as possible.
Yes, of course. So how would you use runes in your practice? Like we said, it can be used both as a divination tool and in spell work. So each of the runes has a specific meaning, like we said, and you can use them for any sort of like magical workings or for divinations. So if you want to use them for divination, you use them similar to a tarot card. And the reason you can absolutely have both. If runes and tarot cards speak to you and you're very into divination, you can use both. Runes tend to be for more specific questions, whereas tarot can give you a general reading of what's going to happen in a certain aspect of your life. You know, overall career, you know, tarot can tell you those things. Runes are a little bit more specific. Runes are also, you know, based on the materials we told you that they can be made out of, they're clearly an earth element. So if you feel very connected to the earth, and that's something you work with in your practice, you might find that you work better with runes than you do with tarot cards in terms of divination.
Yes. As to how to use them for divination, I would say they're slightly more in, you can get more in-depth answers than like the pendulum, which we had previously talked about. But yeah, they don't go quite as into the story of your life as tarot.
Yes. So how you would actually go about using them, they should be cleansed before each use, the same way that you cleanse crystals or a tarot deck. You can put them in moonlight or run them through incense smoke. We talked about all those different cleansing methods. And then the runes are what are traditionally known as casted. You cast runes. That's what it's called. You generally hold them and shake them, or if you keep them in a little bag, you sort of mix them up in the bag while focusing on your specific question. And you pour them onto a cloth on a flat surface. So from here, there's a lot of various ways to choose them and read them. For beginners, it's best to just start by like hand picking one rune out of your set. You know, just don't look at them, obviously, but just reach in and grab which one is calling to you, instead of, you know, casting a whole bunch of them across the cloth. But as you get a little more in tune with your runes, get a little better at the readings, they have various like spreads online that you can look into that are similar to tarot spreads, where they have a past, present, future spread, just like tarot, and different ways that you can read them and cast them. And they will give you guidance on your question or whatever it is that you're ruminating on.
I know a lot of people when they're first getting started, they tend to keep their runes in a nice cloth bag on or near their altar, and then they can just reach in and grab one for a quick question and answer. What should I do next kind of thing?
Exactly. So for using them in spell work, runes are considered good for protection. So you can also use runes to cast protection spells, and you can use the rune symbols throughout your practice. If there's a certain symbol that calls to you or is reflective of a certain, you know, point that you're in your life, and that symbol really calls to you, speaks to you in your magical practice, you can incorporate that into the rest of your workings in the same way that you would sigils.
And I think
what I did there?
I was going to say, I think these are why people get them confused.
See what I did there? So let's jump into sigils. So this is why they are not the same thing. But we definitely understand why it can be confusing, because when some sigils that you would draw look exactly like those sort of glyphs that are on the rune stones. So I completely understand why people get these confused. And since you can use the symbols that are on the runes, you can use them as sigils. I see why the confusion exists. But the sigil is an intention that you condense into a single glyph. So they're incredibly useful because they're coded with your unique magical purpose, and they can be deciphered only by you.
Yes.
So they are especially good for witches who are not out of the broom closet yet, because you are the only one that knows what that sigil means. You can draw it on anything and nobody's going to know that you are a practicing witch.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
There are a ton of ways once you have designed a sigil, which we'll get into in a minute, of how to actually activate it and use it. You can draw them into the bottom of a pie crust before baking. I think that's like something that Tara and I do because we're, hearth witches. So it's very easy to use sigils in cooking, in kitchen witchcraft, because you can like make the sigil, like even if you're stirring something, you can stir in the direction of your sigil. So it's very useful in the kitchen. You can carve it into firewood or candles before you burn them. So if you are big on candles in your witchcraft, if you have a sigil that you're using for a money spell, let's say, that you created a drawing, then you could also use a color candle that's associated with money, like we talked about, and carve that sigil into it just to make your intention even stronger.
Mm-hmm.
You can paint the sigil on rocks and bury them or set them out for decoration on your altar. You can have jewelry created in that shape or stick it on the back of the jewelry. Like there's a lot of possibilities of how you can use it.
Yeah, it's very, very, very versatile. And having said that, Steph and I don't use them a lot, I still use sigils just because they are so versatile. Like I just don't use them exclusively or as often as other things in my practice, but they are very versatile. So if you find one and you create one that works for you, don't be afraid to use it everywhere.
Yes, I agree. I would say that I don't use them as much because I am not artistically inclined. Like I've never been great at sort of like the artsy side. Like my handwriting is atrocious. Like I don't really like painting and drawing and like things like that. And it's just kind of a creative method of drawing that I'm not into.
Yeah, I'm not good at it either. That's also, I'm a perfectionist. So I'm like, it doesn't look right. And then I fiddle with it and fiddle with it and fiddle with it. And then I get frustrated and then I do something else. But
so before you can use it in your magical practice, we should probably tell you how you can create your own sigil.
Yeah, that's kind of important step.
So there's no like single method that has to be used. So you just have to experiment to find what works for you. You may want to Google search if this is something that you think could be very useful to you. And I want to Google search into circle grids or Saturn grids. Those are two different methods where in the circle grid, the alphabet is written out, and in the Saturn grid, numbers are written out, and you spell out the word, like let's say it's money or protection, and there's a certain way that you would start and then follow the letters around like the circle or the numbers associated to the letters around the Saturn grid, and it kind of guides you in how to create that sigil. Either method, they end up looking similar. So it's kind of interesting if you've never looked into those just to see how it works. But you can also just completely create them from scratch. So what you would do is just writing down your intention, set any intention. Protection or money are big ones, but you would just write down the word protection. And then from there, you kind of want to use the letters to condense it down into one single, drawing.
Yeah.
A good way to do that is to, remove any of the vowels or any repeating letters so it gets shorter and shorter. And you can simplify the letters by breaking them down into like similar shapes, lines into like different lines or curves. And then you can arrange the different shapes, sort of make them connect together and try to fit them into one single glyph. It's ends up being kind of like a weird little like blob, but just keep trying until you find something that you like. Just keep rearranging it. And that's why it's kind of tough for me personally to make sigils because my brain just doesn't really work that way. Where it's just like,
Yeah.
keep creating and keep moving things around until you find what I am much more, you know, like structured and by the book. Like if I do make a sigil, I use one of the grid methods that we talked about, like actually get the grid out and draw it. Like that just makes more sense to my brain.
And that's kind of where I have the problem, is the rearranging, because I'm like, what if it goes over better over here, over here, over here, over here, over here, over here, and then if it never looks quite right in like 5 tries, I get frustrated. So
yeah, I agree. That's just, it makes it a little more difficult for me.
Some people that are creative though do awesome at sigils. They have just beautifully flowing lines, and they all connect, and they have purpose and intention, and I'm jealous, but my brain doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I completely agree, but they can be incredibly useful.
They can, yeah.
Because they're so personal, and that's like one of the hallmarks of witchcraft is to just make it your own. That's like one of the ways that you can be the most personal in your practice.
Yeah.
In order to activate it, it's usually enough just to draw it and to infuse your intention into it as you're drawing it. But also the act of destroying it also creates an activation. So you want to kind of think about how you can, in order to activate it, how you can change it. So what I mean is like in baking, in the pie crust, that changes as it gets baked.
Yep.
And the same, like if you were to draw a sigil in the steam in the shower, as like it steams up again, it disappears. So you kind of want to think about that. Like burning it would be the same way, as that, you know, once it's burnt, then your intention is activated. So if you do use these methods where you destroy them, it can also be helpful to include your sigils in your Book of Shadows or Grimoire if you're keeping one of those that we talked about a few weeks ago. It's a good way to write those down. So if you want to use them in the future, and you can track which ones were seemingly successful for you. So it's a good way of keeping track of all of those.
And like we said, they're so versatile and they're so personal, but you can definitely use the same sigil again. If you find one that really works, for instance, protection. I have one that I've used in the past for protection. It's never not been effective for me. So it's not like I'm not going to use it ever again because I need to make a whole new sigil. Like this one has worked for me. This one is personal to me. If I'm doing spell work involving protection, I still use the same one. So that's why writing it down is so important, because it's not like it becomes unpersonal the more you use it.
Right. So yes, I do not often use sigils. There's certain ones that I will use in cooking, but that's pretty much it. And runes are one method of divination that I really don't use, just because I feel like I connect and understand tarot and oracle decks better than I do runes. And pendulums. I like pendulums a lot better. So I don't have a set of runes, but they are beautiful, I have to say.
I think they're beautiful and I want some, but I think it's the same as tarot. My brain just doesn't see the big picture the same way as they're trying to tell me. So I stick with the pendulum. Yes, no, more or less. Like the very simple ones I get. I would love to know more about runes. I just recently read a book on runes, just trying to learn more. And it was like a foreign language to me, honestly. Like it was a really well-written book and I really enjoyed it. And I was like, I do not understand at the end. So my brain just does not work this way.
It is a completely different language. But if you are, interested in it and sort of just dipping your toes into divination in general, then runes can be a really good way to start, because since they're based on that 24 alphabet, that is way less than tarot cards.
Oh yeah, way less.
So there are way less things to memorize and learn than there are with tarot. So if you don't feel particularly you like the idea of divination but don't feel particularly drawn to tarot, or don't want to learn all of the different tarot cards, I totally understand that. Then runes might work a lot better for you, and I would think that they work better for people who are a little more creatively inclined than Tara and I are. You're a little more like messy and artistic in your witchcraft, then you might be drawn to runes and also sigils more than we are.
Yes. Also, they're just so pretty sometimes.
Yeah.
They can't be understated. I'm all about, if it's aesthetically pleasing and it works, grab it with both hands and use it all the time. Like,
amen to
so
that.
pretty. So pretty.
That is all we have for you this week for runes and sigils. Please let us know on Instagram or send us an email if you use either of these in your practice. We would love to see any photos that you have of yours. Please tag us on Instagram if you have a set. We want to see all the different options.
I'm not gonna lie, that is not part of her outline, and I was gonna be like, please take photos. I want to see all the pretty ways that you use them.
Please let us see them.
Please let us see the prettiness.
Yeah, let us live vicariously through you so we don't have to go out and buy runes.
So we're recording this a little early, and I have a shopping problem, so I am trying not to buy all the things that I talk about on this show, and I'm like, runes. Even though I don't use them, I could get a pretty set.
See, we got a problem. Please
we do. Seriously,
show us your runes.
Yes.
All right. We will see you next week.
All right. Bye. Follow us on Insta.
Thanks for listening to Witch Wednesdays with Steph and Tara. Love our content? Consider donating at anchor.fm/witch-wednesdays to help keep our podcast up and running. Please leave us a voicemail on that same site if you have any questions or comments, and follow us on Instagram at Witch Wednesdays Podcast.